It was the kind of crisp autumn morning in the Colorado highlands that made the air taste like cold honey and pine. A hush lingered over the forest, broken only by the rustling leaves and distant cry of a hawk circling over Split Rock Ridge. Dr. Warren Hale, recently retired and known to most locals as the man with the quiet eyes, stood on the creaking porch of his cabin holding a tin cup of black coffee. The steam rose and disappeared like breath in the wind. His silver hair was neatly combed back, but time had begun to leave its stamp. His hands trembled now when he wasn't thinking, and his once commanding voice had softened like everything else in his life since he'd stepped away from the operating room. He had spent over 30 years saving lives in Denver hospitals, stitching together broken bodies with unshakable precision until one day, without warning, he handed in his badge and walked away. Some said it was the patient he lost. Others claimed it was his wife's death that hollowed him out. But Warren never spoke of it, not even when the few neighbors tried to draw him out. He bought the cabin with cash, chopped his own wood, and took weekly walks into the mountains. Never a visitor, never a call. People respected the distance he kept. There was something about him that warned against curiosity. That morning was different, though. Anyone paying close enough attention might have seen it. He lingered a few seconds longer than usual on the porch steps, eyes scanning the treeline with a kind of finality. He wore a thick forest green jacket with a leather strap crossing his chest from a pack slung over his back. His boots were worn, but laced tight. He took one last sip, then placed the mug on the railing, half full, as if planning to return. Then he walked down the trail behind his cabin and into the trees. That was the last time anyone saw Dr. Warren Hale. 2 days passed before anyone noticed. A forest ranger named Lena Brooks knocked on his door for a routine fire check. When no one answered, she assumed he was out hiking. The next day, she came again. Still no answer. The mug was still there, coffee long gone cold, and a thin film now forming on its surface. She looked in through the windows, everything in place. Nothing broken, no signs of disturbance. But something gnawed at her instincts. Warren was a creature of habit. He left notes on the door if he was out more than a night. This time, there was nothing. A missing persons report was filed. Within hours, volunteers were combing the woods. Drones buzzed overhead, scent dogs sniffed through fallen leaves, and helicopters circled for days. The forest gave nothing back. Not a scarf, not a footprint, not even a torn piece of cloth. Split Rock Ridge became the epicenter of the search after one motion-activated wildlife camera captured a single blurry frame of a man. Matching Warren's build, walking just past the boulder line, turning his head as if hearing something. The timestamp matched the morning he left. Beyond that, there were no other signs. It was as if he'd stepped through a doorway no one else could see. Local news ran the story for weeks. Renowned surgeon vanishes in the Rockies. Doctor walks into forest, never returns. Talk shows speculated wildly. Some claimed he faked his death to escape something. Others spun theories of mountain cults, rogue animals, or foul play. A few fringe voices whispered about the haunted stretches of the Colorado backcountry, about places where compasses spun and strange lights moved between trees. But eventually, like all stories that run out of evidence, the world moved on. The cabin was never sold. Dr. Hale had no children, no close friends, no living family. His lawyer ensured the property taxes were paid through a trust, so it sat untouched, aging year after year, visited only by curious hikers and paranormal vloggers who liked to film themselves whispering inside the old bedroom. The inside remained a snapshot of a life paused, a faded flannel shirt hanging behind the door, a stack of surgical journals near the fireplace, a photo of a younger Hale with a smiling woman, his late wife, Amelia, taped to the fridge with a rusting magnet. But it was the mug on the railing that haunted most visitors. Still there. Still exactly where he left it. The mountains didn't forget. 5 years passed. One unusually dry summer brought low waters to many streams, exposing stones and fallen logs long hidden beneath the surface. It also revealed a collapsed beaver dam roughly 10 miles from Hale's cabin. That afternoon, a boy named Caleb Daniels was exploring the area with his grandfather. Caleb was 10, fearless, and obsessed with wild animals. He had a habit of poking through things others ignored. So when he noticed the half-destroyed dam, he waded through ankle-deep water and began pulling at the loose sticks, hoping for bones or shiny stones. What he found was something much stranger. He screamed when he saw it. A pale shape, tangled deep in the woven wood, not quite bone, not quite stone. His grandfather rushed over, thinking it was an animal. But as they looked closer, it became clear. Part of a hiking boot, a strip of green fabric, and something unmistakably human. What looked like a jawbone with several intact teeth, one of which gleamed faintly with a gold crown. The authorities were called. Forensics teams arrived. Over several hours, they carefully dismantled what remained of the dam, revealing more fragments. A broken rusted knife, some clothing threads, and a shattered plastic food container, and something else wedged deep between two logs. A sealed mason jar, waxed tightly, containing folded papers that looked remarkably well preserved. At first, they thought it might be some kind of message left by a hiker, but when the jar was opened and the top page was unfolded, the room went still. The first line read, "If you're reading this, I didn't die how you think." Dental records confirmed it within 48 hours. The jawbone matched Dr. Warren Hale. 5 years after his vanishing, what remained of him was found buried inside a beaver dam. But the real mystery wasn't the bones. It was what those pages said next. What story could a dying man write in the wilderness, alone, with no one around? And why seal it in a jar and wedge it inside a structure built by animals? Everyone wanted answers, but none of them were ready for what the journal contained. The jar was taken to a secure evidence lab in Denver where forensic teams carefully unfolded each sheet inside. The pages, though yellowed, had miraculously stayed dry and legible thanks to the wax seal. It wasn't typed. Every word was handwritten in a hurried but steady script, dense lines filling the paper edge to edge like a man racing time. The first line repeated in larger letters across the top, "If you're reading this, I didn't die how you think." And then the date, October 18th, 5 years ago. The same day Dr. Hale vanished. The first few pages read like a journal, but not in the traditional sense. There were no Dear Diary entries, no daily updates. It was more like a confession, deliberate, precise, and startling. He described his hike on that morning, how he had followed an old trail along the eastern ridge past his usual route. He mentioned hearing something strange, a humming, deep and rhythmic coming from within the rock face. Then, according to the writing, he blacked out. When he came to, it was night. He was cold, disoriented, and injured. His pack was torn and he had a gash on his forehead. The journal described how he tried to find his way back but became lost. He claimed his compass spun in circles and the stars above didn't match the sky he knew. At first, officials thought it was hallucination or trauma-induced delirium, but the handwriting was calm, deliberate, and unshaken. He mentioned landmarks, an oddly shaped tree stump, a set of white stones that looked like vertebrae. He described how time felt inconsistent. Days felt like hours. He stopped writing dates after a while, saying it didn't make sense to keep tracking when nothing followed order. What disturbed investigators most was the section where he began describing the Watchers. According to Hale, he wasn't alone. He wrote of movement in the trees, shapes that mimicked animals but never blinked. Sometimes they whistled in unison. Other times they left patterns near his makeshift shelter, rocks stacked vertically, animal bones arranged like letters. He believed they were watching him, studying him. They never spoke, never attacked, but they never left. He described how he stopped building fires at night because the heat attracted them. The more he resisted sleep, the more he saw them, tall, smooth silhouettes without features standing at the edge of his vision, dissolving when he turned to face them directly. By page 15, Hale admitted he had stopped trying to return home. He focused instead on documenting everything, markings on trees, changes in bird calls, shifts in wind that came without warning. He began referring to the forest as if it were alive, a single breathing entity. The trees move, he wrote. Not visibly, but their positions change. They guide you in and then they don't let you leave. Officials dismissed this as classic signs of isolation psychosis. But something still didn't fit. He described finding items that didn't belong to him. An old camera with no film, a doll made of pine needles, even a map etched into bark showing a path back to the ridge, though when he followed it, the trail led him in circles. But then, abruptly, the tone of the writing shifted. In one chilling paragraph, Hale described waking up beside a river to find small piles of food beside him, berries, smoked fish, even a piece of bread. He believed he was being fed. Whether by the Watchers or something else, he didn't know. They don't want me dead, he wrote. They want me to stay. To know I've been seen. He spoke of dreams, repeating visions of his wife Amelia, standing in the clearing, calling to him, her mouth moving but no sound coming. He described hearing the melody of a song she used to hum when cooking, coming from somewhere deep in the trees. Always that song. It wasn't until page 29 that the Beaver Dam was mentioned. According to Hale, he found it by accident after being chased by something he never fully described. He wrote of hearing cracking branches and low growls, and he dove into the icy creek, crawling under a cluster of logs and mud, the dam. Inside, it was warm, dry, and safe. He stayed there for 2 days, hiding in the hollow, watching from within as something large paced along the shore but never entered the water. That's when the idea came to him. He would leave his story behind inside the one place no predator, no shadow, no creature seemed to disturb. I don't know if I'll ever make it out, the final page read. But this story might. I've seen things no one will believe. Maybe I've lost my mind. Or maybe the world out there has simply forgotten how strange nature can be. Either way, this forest remembers me now. And I can't leave until it lets me go. The last sentence was underlined in shaky ink. If this is found, tell Amelia I tried. Authorities were divided. Some believed Hale had survived for weeks, maybe even months, before succumbing to exposure or injury. Others thought the journal was his final act of desperation, crafted to leave behind a puzzle no one could solve. The idea of him placing the jar inside a beaver dam was so absurd it almost made sense. The dam structure would keep it dry, hidden, and preserved. Still, questions burned hotter than ever. How did a trained doctor with decades of survival knowledge vanish so completely? Why was no trace found until now? And what exactly had he seen in those woods that drove him to such madness or clarity? Public interest exploded again. News outlets scrambled to cover the story. Doctor's wilderness diary reveals chilling tale. Theories swarmed. Cryptid believers, UFO enthusiasts, paranormal experts. Everyone had a version. But one fact couldn't be denied. Hale's handwriting, his dental ID, the boot fragments, all matched. What didn't match was the condition of the final page. Unlike the others, it had a small, muddy fingerprint, one that didn't match Hale or the boy who found it. Authorities reopened the area for investigation. A special task unit was formed to sweep a 3-mile radius around the dam. Trees were tagged. Caves were scanned. Night vision equipment was installed. But nothing else was found. No strange creatures. No remains. Just forest. As endless and still as it had always appeared. Yet for some, something had changed. The idea that maybe Warren Hale hadn't died lost and alone, but had been kept. That maybe something ancient and invisible still moved beneath the pine needles, still watching, still waiting. The forest, it seemed, wasn't finished with its story. The town of Brayers Hollow, once a sleepy mountain community known for trout fishing and antique shops, had transformed overnight into a curiosity magnet. Reporters, thrill-seekers, cryptid hunters, and even a best-selling mystery novelist flooded the area, all hungry for fragments of the story that had emerged from the pages of Dr. Warren Hale's journal. The sheriff's office set up barricades near Split Rock Ridge to keep unlicensed adventurers out, but they came anyway, slipping past trailheads at dawn, hoping to find something the professionals missed. No one found anything. The forest gave no answers. Still, the feeling lingered, like a breath held in the trees, like eyes pressed against the bark, watching. But the most disturbing detail wasn't in the woods. It was inside a digital lab in Denver. A fingerprint, one partial print smudged into the final page of the journal, didn't match anyone in the database. Not Hale, not the boy who discovered the jar, not any ranger, not any registered person on record in the state. It was like a whisper of a person, undocumented and unknown. Too partial to identify, too unique to ignore. Analysts called it a contamination. Others disagreed. Sheriff Dillard, a blunt man with little patience for superstition, told reporters it was probably from a hiker or a worker who handled the jar afterward. But his voice lacked the usual certainty. In private, he kept rereading the last page. Tell Amelia I tried. The words stayed with him. He wasn't sure why. Back in Brayers Hollow, Lena Brooks, the ranger who had first noticed Hale's absence 5 years ago, couldn't sleep. She had known something was wrong that day, and she hated how right she'd been. Now she found herself returning to his cabin, not officially, just in passing, sweeping the porch, checking the windows, walking the trail that led into the trees. She told herself it was habit. But it was more. The discovery had reawakened a haunting feeling she had buried. She remembered the day they'd first opened the cabin and found the mug still sitting there, as if waiting for its owner. She remembered the deep stillness inside, like the air had been holding its breath. And she remembered vividly a strange smell. Not rot, not mold, but something unfamiliar, like burnt leaves and wet iron. She never told anyone about that smell. Until now, she thought she'd imagined it. On a hunch, Lena visited the university in Boulder and requested access to Hale's academic records, particularly his field work from medical school. She was curious, what kind of man walks into the forest and chooses to die writing stories about watchers and changing stars? She expected journals full of surgeries, lectures, and technical notes. What she found was something different. A much younger Hale had once pursued a thesis on the psychological effects of extended isolation. His research had taken him to remote outposts, caves, and solo wilderness trips. He had even spent a month alone in the Yukon documenting sleep deprivation and sensory hallucinations. That was decades ago, but the handwriting was the same, and buried among his early notes was a single phrase that froze her where she stood. The forest doesn't take you all at once. It waits. It watches. And then it decides. Lena closed the file, heart pounding. He had written that sentence when he was 23. Long before Amelia died. Long before the cabin. Long before his disappearance. She realized then that Hale hadn't wandered into the forest by accident. He had returned to it, like a patient returns to a wound that never healed. Back in town, Caleb Daniels, the boy who had discovered the dam, had grown quiet since that day. His parents thought he was just overwhelmed by the media attention. But he wasn't sleeping well. He would wake at night saying he heard tapping on his window even though they lived 2 floors up. He started drawing trees over and over again, black trunks, dozens of them, and always with dark shadows between. His parents thought it was just leftover trauma. But one drawing chilled them, a picture of a man kneeling by a river, a jar in his hands, and behind him, tall, faceless figures standing at the tree line. When his father asked who they were, Caleb answered quietly, the ones who helped him write it. That night, his mother found him standing at the back door, hand on the knob. When she asked where he was going, he said, "They want to show me something." She locked the door and called a child psychologist the next morning. Caleb said nothing more after that. But he kept drawing. Meanwhile, one of the specialists from the task unit, Dr. Eli Hammond, a forensic botanist, noticed something peculiar during the analysis of the vegetation in and around the Beaver Dam. The sticks used to build the structure had markings, subtle ones, tiny scratches, almost like runes. At first, he dismissed them as bite marks or weathering. But then he found symmetry. Symbols repeated, some inverted, some aligned. And none of them were consistent with beaver behavior. He flagged it to the team. No one took it seriously except a linguist named Marla Voss, who visited to see for herself. She stared at the etchings for hours. Then she asked the most unexpected question. What if these aren't symbols written by something? What if Hale himself carved them and the beavers just used the sticks afterward? Hammond laughed it off. What kind of man lies dying in the woods and spends his last energy carving cryptic patterns into sticks? Marla didn't laugh. A man who thinks someone is watching. A man who wants to be remembered. The pieces didn't fit, but they were beginning to lean toward each other like logs in the dam Hale had chosen. A strange convergence was forming: science, mystery, memory. It was no longer just a story about a missing man. It had become something else. Something layered and unsolved. Then, a week after the dam discovery, Lena Brooks received an envelope in her ranger station mailbox. It had no return address. Inside was a single photograph, an aerial image from an old weather balloon dated 5 years ago, the same month Hale vanished. In the bottom corner of the frame was Split Rock Ridge. But at the center of the image, half hidden in a clearing no longer visible today, was a perfect circle of stones. 12 of them, arranged in a ring. No trail led to it. No structure around it. Just the stones. And something standing in the center, a dark shape, tall, still, and faceless. There was no note. Just one word scribbled on the back in neat handwriting. Return. The word echoed in Lena's mind for hours. Return. It was too deliberate, too precise to ignore. She held the photograph in her hands long after the ranger station had gone quiet, staring at the faint gray ring of stones captured from the sky. They were unnatural in their perfection. 12 stones, equidistant. Their presence in the clearing made no geological sense, and there were no known records of ancient settlements in that part of the forest. It was as though they had simply appeared. And if the date on the photo was accurate, they had appeared exactly when Warren Hale disappeared. She brought the image to Sheriff Dillard the next morning, expecting him to dismiss it, to grumble about pranksters. Instead, he stared at it longer than she expected. He tapped a finger on the figure in the middle, the shadow, just human-shaped enough to make your skin crawl, and said that there is no damn tree. Then he folded the photo and slid it into his desk without a word. Later that night, he phoned in a request for satellite imaging of the same coordinates, but no new photos showed the circle. The clearing was overgrown. The stones were gone, as if they'd never existed. Meanwhile, the journal pages were still being studied. Digital analysts enhanced faint impressions beneath Hale's original handwriting and discovered that some pages had writing etched beneath the surface, notes that had been erased or rewritten. One such ghost line read, "They're not animals, not spirits. They were here before us. They built nothing. They take what watches." No one could explain it. But the more the pages were analyzed, the more it became clear that Hale had grown increasingly obsessed with patterns. Repeating bird calls, branch formations, and especially circles. His last diagrams, rough sketches on the margins, showed a ring of 12 dots and a central point he labeled as I. The media had cooled down by then, replaced by fresher headlines. But for those still watching, Lena, Marla the linguist, Sheriff Dillard, and now a growing group of silent online investigators, the puzzle was far from over. Reddit threads grew dense with theories. Some believed Hale had stumbled upon an undiscovered tribe. Others argued he had found a psychological blind spot in human perception, someplace where the rules of space and memory broke down. A few darker theories surfaced too, whispers of old gods, of natural entities without names that lingered in forgotten places and fed not on flesh but on awareness. No one agreed on anything, but all of them wanted to find that circle. Marla Voss wasn't waiting for permission. Using Hale's original journals, the dam coordinates, and the topography around Split Rock Ridge, she mapped a rough triangulation of where the stone ring might have been. She invited Lena to join, and they set out early, telling no one. They carried satellite phones, thermal gear, and emergency packs. But as they entered the deep woods, the signal weakened faster than expected. Their compass needles quivered. The birds were silent. By mid-afternoon, they found something. It wasn't the circle, but a tree massive, dead, and stripped of bark. Around it, 12 smaller trees formed an irregular ring, each bent slightly inward as if bowing toward the center. And at the base of the dead trunk was a small pile of objects, teeth, rusted coins, a cracked wristwatch, and something Lena recognized instantly, a surgical pin. Hale had mentioned it in the journal. It had been in his knee since a skiing accident in '98. It shouldn't have been there. Not out in the open, untouched by animals, unburied and placed like an offering. Marla took photos. Her hands were trembling. That night they set up camp, though neither woman slept. Strange sounds pulsed through the forest, metallic tapping, soft rustling from no clear direction. At 3:17 a.m., Lena opened her eyes to find Marla standing outside the tent, staring into the trees, mumbling in a language she didn't recognize. Lena grabbed her shoulder. Marla snapped out of it, confused, unable to recall why she'd gone out or what she had been saying. They left at dawn. But when they returned to the ranger station, Lena reviewed the thermal footage from Marla's device and paused the playback at 3:17. There were 12 heat signatures. Around their camp. Still. Watching. Back in town, Sheriff Dillard was growing uneasy. That same day, the weather balloon company that had taken the photo 5 years ago emailed him something strange. The original image had been removed from their archives. Vanished. No request. No deletion logs. Just gone. He went to retrieve the printed photo from his drawer. It was gone too. That night, he drove alone to Hale's cabin, something he hadn't done since the initial disappearance. He stood on the porch, staring at the rusted mug, still there, still untouched. Then he stepped inside. The place smelled the same, cedar and dust. Everything was as it had been left. But now something felt different. He walked through each room slowly, flashlight bouncing off the wooden walls. In the bedroom, the closet door was open. Inside, folded neatly on the floor, was a forest ranger's jacket. It wasn't Lena's. And stitched into the collar was a name tag that read, W. Hale. He stepped back. The air grew heavier. The silence thickened. Behind him, somewhere deep in the trees, he heard it, a long, low whistle. One note. Too perfect to be wind. He left without closing the door. The next morning, Caleb Daniels' mother found her son's bed empty. His shoes were gone, the back door left ajar. No signs of struggle. Just a note on his pillow. Written in clumsy, uneven handwriting. They told me to come. I have to return what's theirs. A search party was launched within an hour. Drones, dogs, all of it. But Caleb was gone. Vanished without a trace. Just like Warren Hale. And once again, the forest said nothing. They found Caleb's footprints in the soft dirt just beyond the fence line of his backyard, barefoot, heading east, toward the tree line. After about 20 yards, the prints simply stopped. No sign of a turn, no drag marks, no return path. The soil was undisturbed beyond that point, as though the boy had been lifted straight into the air or vanished into thin fog. Search dogs brought in from Durango circled the yard frantically, whimpering instead of barking. When let loose in the woods, they wandered aimlessly, disoriented, refusing to follow the scent. After hours of confusion, one dog returned to the Daniels' yard and lay down beside Caleb's favorite swing, refusing to move. The others followed silently. News of Caleb's disappearance traveled fast, and the town once again found itself gripped by panic. It had been 5 years since a man disappeared without a trace, and now a child. People began boarding their windows, setting alarms, and refusing to let their children play outdoors. The town's small general store sold out of batteries, flashlights, and trail maps in a single afternoon. That evening, a town hall meeting was called. Sheriff Dillard stood on the stage, his face haggard, eyes sunk deep in their sockets. He didn't offer explanations, only silence. Then he told them about the note, about Caleb's final words. They told me to come. The silence that followed was suffocating. Lena sat in the back, her mind racing. The circle of stones, the heat signatures, the ranger jacket with Hale's name. It was all connected. She felt it in her chest like a storm waiting to crack open. After the meeting, she slipped out and made her way to her truck, but someone was waiting for her there, Marla Voss. Her expression was pale, lips drawn tight. She held up her phone, showing Lena a photo of a rock face near Split Rock Ridge. Carved into the surface, clear and deliberate, was a symbol. A circle with 12 points around it. Marla's voice shook when she spoke. This wasn't here before. I would have noticed. I should have noticed. Lena took the phone and zoomed in. The etchings were fresh, not ancient, as if someone had carved them within the last few days. Beneath the circle was a crude outline of what looked like a child, stick figure style, hand extended toward the ring. Lena felt the cold creep into her spine. She looked up at Marla. What does it mean? Marla hesitated. I think he was taken to complete something. Hale's journal talked about patterns, right? Circles, rhythms, balances. He said the forest didn't want him dead, that it wanted him to stay. What if Caleb is part of that same pattern? What if this place, this thing, it takes people when it needs them? It sounded crazy. But nothing about this case had been sane since the day they pulled the jar out of the dam. Lena made a decision. They would go back. One more time. They had to return to the circle. By morning, they were packed. Sheriff Dillard was informed but didn't offer resistance. He just handed Lena his old revolver and said, "If you find that boy, bring him home. If you find anything else, don't follow it." They hiked in silence, each step heavier than the last. The forest felt thicker than before, as though the trees had grown closer together overnight. Light filtered through the canopy in strange ways, sharper, almost deliberate. The deeper they went, the less the trail looked familiar. Even Lena, who had walked these woods 100 times, couldn't recognize the landscape. It was like a memory that had been rearranged. By early evening, they reached the clearing, the one with the dead tree. But this time, something had changed. The 12 bowed saplings were gone. In their place stood 12 stone markers, each the size of a tombstone, perfectly placed, cold and smooth, with strange carvings down their faces. At the center of the ring, there was no tree, only a circle of ash and dirt like something had been burned away. The place reeked of wet iron. And in the very center, half buried beneath the soot, was a shoe. It was small, red, torn at the sole. It was Caleb's. Lena dropped to her knees, brushing ash from the laces. "He was here," she whispered. Marla moved carefully around the stones, her hands gliding over the symbols. "This isn't just a meeting place," she murmured. "It's a ritual ground." Suddenly, the forest around them shifted. Not in noise, not in wind, but in presence. Lena stood up, body tense. Something was watching. Not from a distance. Close. All around. Then came the whistle. Long, low, drawn from nowhere and everywhere. The same tone Warren Hale had described in his journal. The same sound Sheriff Dillard had heard outside Hale's cabin. It wasn't a bird. It wasn't the wind. It was a call. And it wanted something. Marla turned, face pale. "We shouldn't be here." But Lena's eyes were locked on the circle. Her hand reached for her pocket, pulled out something she hadn't realized she brought, a tiny silver locket that had once belonged to Hale's wife. She found it in the cabin on a shelf above the stove, long forgotten. She opened it now. Inside, a faded picture of Warren and Amelia. Her thumb brushed the image and, for a second, the wind stopped. The forest went silent. Then the ground beneath them shifted. The ash inside the circle stirred, moving outward like ripples on water. A hum filled the air, deep, low frequency, vibrating in their bones. Lena stumbled back. Marla screamed. And then, from the ash, something began to rise. Not a person. Not an animal. A shape. Vague at first, then forming, long, slender, almost humanoid. No face. No features. Just movement. Smoke coalescing into presence. The temperature dropped. Lena couldn't move. Her legs locked. Her eyes refused to blink. And then the thing spoke. Not with words. Not aloud. But inside their heads. A whisper. Return what you took. Lena fell to her knees, clutching the locket. Her mind raced. What had they taken? Then she remembered. The journal. It wasn't a message. It was a bargain. Hale hadn't left it to be found. He had left it to be returned. Marla screamed again, grabbing Lena's shoulder. We have to go now. But the circle pulsed again, and in the ash the shape of a hand emerged, small, child-sized. Faint echo followed. A voice. Caleb's voice. I want to go home. Then the shape collapsed. The wind exploded. The trees howled, and both women blacked out. When Lena woke, the sun was rising. The circle was gone. The stones, the ash vanished. She looked beside her. Marla was still there, breathing, eyes flickering open. But something else was there too. A boy. Wrapped in an old flannel jacket, barefoot, staring into the trees. Caleb. He turned slowly toward Lena. I think. I was asleep. Then he looked up at the rising sun and asked, Is it over? Lena didn't have an answer. She just held him close and whispered, You're home now. But deep in her bones, she felt it. The forest was not done. It had given something back. But it never gives without keeping something in return. The return of Caleb Daniels should have been a miracle. To his parents, it was. Tears and embraces overflowed in the hospital room, doctors baffled at how a 10-year-old boy could vanish for a week in the wild and return without a single scratch. No bruises, no frostbite, no signs of dehydration. His clothes were dirty but not torn. His pulse was calm. He remembered very little, bits and pieces, like dreams half remembered after waking. A circle of stones. Whispers in trees. A man who wasn't Warren Hale but spoke like him, told him stories, kept him calm. Caleb said he was asleep but awake, and in that sleep, someone kept him safe. The world watched as news broke. Lost boy returns from haunted woods unharmed. Theories flared again. Had he hidden himself in some forgotten shelter? Was it all a hoax? But no one could explain the gaps. Especially the trail cameras. The ones that had been set up near the ridge, motion-activated and infrared. One had been triggered at 3:19 a.m., the same hour Lena and Marla blacked out. The frame captured 12 glowing heat signatures arranged in a circle. And in the middle, one small figure kneeling. It matched Caleb's height. The image lasted for one frame. The next one was blank. Lena studied the image on her laptop over and over. She knew what it meant, though she couldn't bring herself to say it out loud. Caleb had been taken. Returned. But not unchanged. A week passed. Caleb slept through most of it, barely speaking. When awake, he drew obsessively circles, trees, shadowy figures. Sometimes a cabin. Sometimes a jar. Always the same ring of stones, always the same hand reaching toward it. At night, he would murmur in his sleep, words in a language no one recognized, and then fall silent. One night, he suddenly woke up crying, clutching his chest, saying, It's still watching me through the bark. His parents thought it was trauma. Lena wasn't so sure. Marla had returned to Boulder, shaken but obsessed. She sent Lena regular updates, photographs of stone circles in other countries, ancient structures, cave markings that matched the symbols they saw on the trees. She was convinced that whatever force lay beneath Brayer's Hollow wasn't unique to Colorado. She believed it was older than human memory, hidden in isolated pockets of wilderness around the world, and only those who listened deeply or wandered too far ever felt its pull. It's not haunting us, she wrote in one email. It's waiting. And it knows we're looking now. Sheriff Dillard kept the town calm, but he wasn't calm himself. At night, he stayed in his office staring at the last page of Hale's journal. The words burned into his mind. They don't want me dead. They want me to stay. The sheriff didn't say it aloud, but he'd begun carrying his father's old revolver everywhere, even into the diner. Then, something unexpected happened. A call came in from a ranger station in Montana. A team hiking in the Bitterroot Range had found a sealed glass jar, lodged beneath a fallen log near a stream. Inside was a collection of pages bound in wax twine. The handwriting matched Hale's. But these weren't torn or scattered like the last journal. These pages were different. They were copied, transcribed, refined, written deliberately as if for someone else to read. The top page simply read, "Account 2 witness." They were shipped to Denver immediately. Lena was called to review them first. As she sat at the long table under sterile white light, she braced herself. The first entry began not with a date, but a place, the mouth in the trees. Hale described waking from a dreamless void, standing at the edge of a massive forest unlike any he'd seen before. He described colors that didn't belong to the natural world, smells of iron and wet stone, sounds like breathing made of wind. There were no animals, no sky, just trees that bent inward like a tunnel and something pulsing at the center. He claimed he had not been alone. There were others, he wrote. Not people, not creatures, shadows that remembered. They circled me, watched me, and whispered truths I've forgotten since birth. They showed me patterns in stars that no longer exist. They made me understand that time doesn't move forward here. It loops. It repeats until the right offering is made. He mentioned Caleb. He is important, Hale wrote, not because of who he is, but because of what he carries. He doesn't know it yet, but they do. He woke something, and that something isn't going back to sleep. The final line on the last page read, "When you hear the whistle, don't answer. Even silence is a kind of invitation." Lena leaned back in her chair, blood cold. She knew then that what happened to Hale hadn't ended with his death. It had only paused, and with Caleb's return, the cycle had resumed. But the biggest shock came the next morning. Caleb disappeared again. His bed was untouched. Window closed. No signs of forced entry. But this time there was no note. Only a circle drawn in mud on the bedroom floor, 12 dots around it. And a single pine needle placed carefully at the center. Lena stood in his room, heart pounding, rage building beneath her fear. She wasn't going to sit back this time. She wasn't going to let the forest decide who stayed and who vanished. This time she would go after him. She returned to the site alone, armed with every map, every tool, and every shred of information she had. She hiked for hours, the terrain unfamiliar again, as if reshaped. But she knew this was what it wanted. The forest had become a maze that responded not to compass or path, but intent. She came to the clearing near sunset. The stones had returned. But now, a 13th stone stood at the center, and upon it sat a glass jar. Lena stepped forward slowly, heart thundering. Inside the jar was a page. Her name was written across it, in Warren Hale's handwriting. Lena stared at the jar resting atop the 13th stone as the last rays of the sun bled through the trees behind her. The glass caught the amber light, glinting like a quiet dare. Her name, Lena Brooks, was scrawled across the parchment inside, unmistakably in Hale's hand, strong and precise. He had been gone for 5 years. Dead. Confirmed. But here, in the middle of this impossible ring of stones, a message waited for her as though it had been placed just moments before. She reached out slowly, her fingers trembling, half expecting the jar to vanish like smoke the moment she touched it. But it didn't. The glass was solid. Cold. She unscrewed the lid. The scent that escaped was faint but oddly familiar: pine, old paper, and something metallic. She unfolded the page. Just one. Short. Sparse. But every word was a knife. Lena. You came after him. I knew you would. The forest saw that. It watches for love, it feeds on it. You are marked now. You crossed the threshold by choice, not by mistake like me. You'll see more than I ever did. But be careful, once the forest lets you see, it doesn't let you forget. The circle wants 13. I delayed it. You might break it. But not alone. Look for the child in the dream. He knows the way back. W.H. The wind changed. It wasn't a gust, not natural. It came all at once, pressing against her like a wave, carrying the sharp smell of smoke and moss and something deeper, wetwood rotting in old places. She backed away from the stones. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she didn't. She folded the note carefully and tucked it into her jacket pocket. Then she turned and walked away, never looking back. It took her longer to return to her vehicle than it had to hike in. The forest seemed to stretch behind her as if unwilling to let her go easily. By the time she reached the road, the stars had appeared above, cold and scattered. She didn't go home. She drove straight to Sheriff Dillard's office, stormed inside, and dropped the jar onto his desk. He stared at it for a long moment before speaking. "He wrote your name?" Lena nodded. "It wasn't a coincidence, Sheriff. This has all been part of something. A ritual. A cycle. Caleb was part of it. So was Hale. Now I am too." He leaned back, running a hand over his face. "You think there'll be others?" "I know there will be," Lena said. "And if we don't figure out what the 13th means, someone else will disappear. Maybe more." Dillard sighed. "And what's this about the child in the dream?" She hesitated. "That's what scares me most. I think he meant Caleb, but not the Caleb we knew." The sheriff stared at her. "You think something came back with him?" Lena didn't answer. She didn't need to. In the following days, Caleb's drawings became more precise. He no longer used crayons or rough pencils. He used charcoal, found somewhere no one had given him. He drew the stones in perfect alignment. Then, new ones. Arranged in a spiral this time. He drew faces he'd never seen. One of them was Lena's. He no longer spoke unless spoken to. And when he did, he answered questions that hadn't been asked aloud. One afternoon, he sat in the hospital garden and began humming a strange melody, slow and dissonant like wind passing through broken glass. When asked where he heard it, he simply said, "The man in the circle sang it to me." The staff assumed he meant Hale. Lena wasn't so sure. The more she read Hale's recovered writings, the more she suspected he hadn't been alone in the forest. There were others. Witnesses. Vessels. Voices. Hale described beings not as monsters, but as intentions, ideas with shape. They mimicked the living. They lured people deeper using what they longed for. In Hale's case, his wife's voice. In Caleb's? Comfort. Safety. The illusion of a guardian. But something was off. A darkness had taken root. That week, 3 hikers went missing near the same ridge. No signs of attack. No belongings left behind. No cell signals. One was a woman who posted a video to her feed just minutes before vanishing. In it, she stood on the trail smiling. In the last few seconds, she turned abruptly and looked into the woods behind her. Her smile faded. Then she whispered, "Do you hear that?" The video cut off. They found her phone days later in the crook of a tree, 10 feet off the ground. Sheriff Dillard issued a temporary trail closure. He kept the reason vague, unstable terrain. But Lena knew better. She started mapping the disappearances. They formed a ring 12 points around a central location, the clearing. 13 stones. 13 events. 13 pieces. She spent nights rereading the journal. Then it clicked. The forest doesn't take you all at once. It waits. It watches. And then it decides. It wasn't hunting. It was choosing. Each disappearance, each return, measured. Purposeful. She visited Caleb again, this time alone. He looked up at her, eyes too still, too old. "I saw you in the circle," he said. Lena sat across from him slowly. "What did you see me doing?" He tilted his head. "Giving it something. Something it wants." "What does it want?" He looked past her shoulder, to the window, to the woods. "It wants to be understood." Then he blinked and whispered, almost as if apologizing, "It wants you to go back." Lena didn't sleep that night. The next morning, she received an unmarked envelope. Inside was another photo. Black and white. Grainy. Clearly old. It showed a boy standing at the edge of a river, one hand extended, and behind him, 12 shadows. Just like Caleb's drawing. On the back of the photo, in faint script. "This has happened before." Lena closed her eyes. The forest wasn't waking up. It had never gone to sleep. And it was just beginning to open its eyes. Lena didn't wait for permission this time. By the time the sun crested the ridge the next morning, she was already past the last boundary marker, hiking alone toward the forest's deep interior. She brought only essentials: compass, flare, survival pack, the revolver Dillard had given her, and the page with her name on it. She wore Hale's old locket around her neck, cold against her skin, a weight both sentimental and unsettling. The farther she moved into the woods, the more the trees seemed to lean in, closing around her path. The world grew quieter. The air itself seemed to shift, heavy with intention. And then she heard it, a single whistle, soft, familiar. She froze. She didn't answer. The forest, satisfied with her silence, let her pass. After hours of hiking, she came to the place she knew was waiting for her. The clearing. But this time it was different. The 13 stones remained, tall and cold, but something else had taken form between them, a structure crude and ancient-looking. A domed arrangement of branches, animal bones, and moss built with care. At first glance it looked like a shelter. But it wasn't. It was a shrine, and at the base of the shrine lay something wrapped in burlap. She approached slowly, revolver drawn. With trembling hands she peeled the cloth away. It was a skull. Small. Human. Not Caleb's. That much she could tell. But very old. Inside the cloth were other objects, faded buttons, a strip of flannel, a rusted belt buckle. And beneath them all, a page preserved in wax. She slid it out carefully. It was a letter. October 1919. To whoever finds this. You are not the first. We were 6 when we entered. 3 when we left. The trees took the rest. We thought we were chasing a legend, a ring of stones, a place where time folds. We were wrong. We didn't find it. It found us. One of ours never came back. But he didn't die. I still hear him sometimes. I see him when I close my eyes. If you are here, then you've heard the call too. Don't answer it. Please. Don't complete the circle. There was no signature. No name. Just a smudge of blood in the corner. Lena sat back on her heels, the forest spinning around her. The same whispers, the same losses had happened before. This wasn't a one-time phenomenon. This place had history. And it had always followed the same pattern. The whistle. The child. The circle. Then she heard a soft crunch behind her. She spun around, revolver raised. Nothing. But the air was thicker now. The shadows between the trees moved differently as if reacting to her breath. She stood and backed away from the shrine, her boots pressing into the soft dirt. And that's when she saw them. Footprints. Dozens of them. Small, bare feet. Children's feet. Leading into the forest. Some fresh. Others faded. All of them heading in the same direction. She followed. The trail wove through thick undergrowth, twisted past gnarled trees, and then descended into a narrow ravine lined with moss-covered stone. The deeper she went, the less sunlight reached her. Everything took on a bluish-gray tint, like dusk frozen in place. Finally, she reached it, the mouth in the trees, just like Hale had written. It wasn't a cave exactly, more like an opening between massive roots and stone, wide enough to enter if you crouched. Blackness beyond. The forest pulsed here, not with sound but with memory. The bark on nearby trees was smooth, stripped bare. Symbols had been carved into them. Circles. Eyes. Shapes that almost looked like letters, but not in any language Lena recognized. She swallowed hard and crawled inside. At first, there was only darkness. Then a faint glow, phosphorescent patterns on the walls, as though something within the stone itself remembered being touched. The tunnel was narrow but opened into a chamber the size of a large room. Inside were remnants of things, old tins, a rusted compass, a boot, the frame of a broken glasses lens, and in the far corner a journal. Bound in black leather, cracked with age. She picked it up. The first page read, J. Harrow, 1873. Field notes. Brayer's Hollow anomaly. She flipped through, skimming entries. Harrow spoke of a local legend among the native Ute people, something called Nashadawe, which loosely translated to the circle that remembers. He wrote of voices in the forest that mimicked loved ones, of people vanishing and returning changed. He theorized that it was not a creature, but a consciousness embedded in the land itself, a kind of ancient memory loop that reactivated when disturbed. His final entry, I believe the forest selects. It does not consume. It recruits. Lena felt sick. A flicker of movement in the corner of her eye made her spin. A shape, small, watching, then gone. She grabbed the journal and turned to leave, heart hammering. As she emerged into the trees, the whistle returned. Closer this time. Then a voice. Caleb's. Lena, it whispered. She turned. He was standing there. But something was wrong. His eyes were black. No pupils. No whites. Just void. He smiled, but it wasn't his smile. You saw it now, he said, his voice not quite matching his lips. And then, one more. The circle's almost ready. She stepped back. He didn't follow. He just turned and walked into the forest. Lena ran. She didn't stop until she was miles from the clearing, knees buckling near her truck. Her hands shook as she turned the engine over. She didn't sleep that night. just sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the journal, at the letter, at the drawing Caleb had left behind. And she finally understood. They weren't just being taken. They were being changed, transformed into witnesses. And she feared she was already becoming one of them. The storm hit Briar's Hollow 2 nights after Lena's return. Thunder cracked over the mountains like old bones breaking in the dark. Wind tore through the streets, and lightning revealed brief snapshots of the forest. Trees bending, groaning, almost moving with purpose. The town hunkered down, power flickered, and in the chaos, no one noticed the faint, distant sound that pulsed underneath the storm like a heartbeat. A whistle. Low. Long familiar. In the morning, there were new reports. A trail guide, Vanessa Sutter, had vanished from her campsite on the southern ridge. Her partner found her tent still zipped, undisturbed, but empty. She had left no footprints in the mud. Just one thing placed neatly beside her sleeping bag, a single, weathered pine cone soaked in ash. When Lena heard the news, she didn't react. Not visibly. Not anymore. It had begun again. The 13th wasn't a warning. It was a countdown. She returned to Sheriff Dillard that morning, her eyes hollow, the black leather journal from the cave pressed against her chest like a confession. She placed it on his desk without a word. He opened it slowly, reading Harrow's entries in grim silence. The further he read, the paler he became. After a long pause, he looked up. This can't be real. Lena didn't blink. Then tell me what's happening. He didn't answer. They both knew the truth was more than real. It was ancient. Lena unfolded a map of the surrounding wilderness, overlaying markers where disappearances had occurred over the decades, Hale's vanishing, the hikers, the children, now Vanessa. The pattern was unmistakable. The points formed a wheel. 12 spokes. And one empty space in the center. It's the mouth, Lena said. The origin. The thing that started this. The 13th event is supposed to complete it. Seal the ritual. Or, if we can stop it, break it. Dillard exhaled, voice low. Break it how? That's what I don't know yet, she said. But someone's been leaving us clues. Hale. Harrow. Even Caleb or whatever version of him came back. She didn't say what she feared most, that the Caleb who returned was only partly the boy who left. That something had ridden him out like a lifeboat, tethered to him by memory and love and that terrible whistle. Still, she couldn't abandon him. Not yet. She went back to the hospital that afternoon. Caleb was in the garden again, silent, sketching. Can I see what you're drawing? She asked. He handed it to her without looking up. The page was filled with lines and symbols, arcs, circles, stars, eyes. But in the center was a figure. Human-shaped. Bound by vines. Surrounded by 13 tall stones. She crouched down. Is that you? He shook his head. It's not me anymore. Then who is it? He looked at her now. His eyes were brown again, but there was something older behind them. It's who I'll become if it finishes. She swallowed hard. Can it be stopped? He looked away. Only if someone stays in the center instead. Who? He didn't answer. But Lena already knew. That night, she sat alone in her cabin, reading Hale's journal again. She traced every line, every broken sentence. The entries weren't just thoughts, they were instructions. A map of choices, failures, hopes. One line stood out now more than ever. They take what watches, not what speaks, not what runs, what watches. The forest fed on awareness, on memory, on those who observed its shape and survived long enough to tell. That's why Hale wrote. That's why Harrow left notes. That's why Caleb drew. And that's why she had been chosen. The moment she saw the circle, the forest had seen her too. She packed her gear slowly, deliberately, this time not to investigate. This time to intervene. Before she left, she wrote a letter to Sheriff Dillard. Slid it under his door in the middle of the night. If I don't return, don't come looking. That's how it spreads. If this works, the disappearances will stop. If it doesn't, you'll know. Tell Caleb, I'm proud of him. Tell the forest. I see it now. Then she drove. No trailhead this time. No official route. She parked where the road ended and walked into the dark. Hours passed. The forest warped again, no GPS, no compass. But she didn't need them anymore. The woods bent to those who belonged, and now she did. She followed the whispers. The symbols carved into the bark. The soft, rhythmic hum that pulsed through the soil. She came to the shrine once more. The 13 stones were there, waiting. The circle was complete now. No missing spots. No gaps. As she stepped inside, the wind died. Her breath stilled. Sound vanished. She knelt at the center, unzipped her pack, and pulled out her own journal. She began to write, "My name is Lena Brooks. If you're reading this, you found what we tried to bury. This place doesn't want to hurt us. It wants to remember through us. But if we give it everything, it forgets how to take. So I'm giving it me." She placed the journal on the stone beside her. Then she closed her eyes and whispered, "I see you." The forest answered, with wind, with song, with silence. In the morning, Dillard found her truck on the road's edge. The door unlocked, the engine cold. He didn't open the letter until sunset. And as he finished reading it, the town felt lighter. Birds returned to the ridge. The air felt clearer. No more whistles. No more vanishings. It had stopped. But deep in the woods, beneath the roots, a shape waited, half stone, half memory. 13 witnesses. And one who chose to stay. For a full month after Lena Brooks walked into the forest and vanished, not a single person went missing. Not a single trail marker was disturbed. No hikers disappeared. No strange whistles. No blackouts. No dreams of circles or stones or flickers of movement just beyond the corner of vision. It was as if the forest itself had exhaled for the first time in decades. Sheriff Dillard kept the trail closure in place anyway against town council's objections. When asked, he only said, "It's still there. Just quieter." Caleb Daniels was released into his parents' care a few days later. He no longer drew circles. He no longer spoke to the trees. He was different now, quieter, yes, but not haunted. As if something inside him had been unhooked. His eyes, once disturbingly hollow, had color again. His nightmares stopped. When his mother asked him what he remembered about the woods, he simply replied, "It let me go." What he didn't say was this: he still heard her voice sometimes. Lena's. Not calling for help. Not crying. Just speaking softly in a language that wasn't made of words. Like wind. Like memory. Like song. One evening, Caleb asked his father for a flashlight. Not to play. To walk. He went alone to the edge of the tree line where the grass grew wild and the first layer of forest shadow stretched across the fields. He stood there for a long time, just looking. Then he whispered, "Thank you," and turned back. The next day, Sheriff Dillard drove out to the ridge. He sat for hours in his patrol truck, staring into the canopy. His hand never left the revolver resting on the passenger seat, though he didn't touch it. He didn't go into the woods. He knew that the peace they'd been granted wasn't final. It was an exchange. An understanding. The 13th had been filled. A witness had remained. And the forest, in its own unknowable logic, had been satisfied. But for how long? Back at the ranger station, Lena's journal remained locked in the desk drawer where he had placed it. He'd read it a dozen times now, memorized passages she'd scrawled in the margins, questions to herself, to the forest, to Warren Hale. And though no one could explain how or why, more pages had appeared in it since her disappearance. Fresh ink. A different pen. One entry simply read, "It remembers me. But I remember it now too. Balance is possible. But only from within. I'm not trapped. I'm part of it." Another said, "I see others. Not alive, not dead. Just awake. They are not monsters. They are stories that were never told. And they live here." Dillard copied those pages, burned the originals, and buried the copies in a sealed box under the floor of the ranger station. He didn't tell anyone. It felt too dangerous to exist openly, as if even reading them was permission. Still, part of him couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to step into the forest one more time, not as a sheriff, not as a rescuer, but as someone willing to understand. To see it the way Lena had. To become part of it. But he never did. Instead, he took a sabbatical and moved east for a while. Somewhere flat. Somewhere treeless. Meanwhile, stories about Brayer's Hollow began to fade. The old rumors died off. New tourists came. Real estate developers sniffed around again, but never built. Locals said the forest had a strange feel, beautiful, yes, but watchful. A place best admired from afar. The town adjusted. It healed in its way. But not everyone forgot. In a college in Boulder, Marla Voss gave up teaching. She published one final paper before disappearing entirely, an analysis of repeating natural patterns in indigenous mythology tied to geologically stable areas with consistent magnetic anomalies. The paper mentioned Brayer's Hollow only once. It was footnoted with a quote, "Not all circles are prisons. Some are keys." She left behind her field notes. In them was a photograph taken on her last trip. It showed the clearing, but altered. No shrine. No stones. Just a single tree. Thick. Towering. Its bark smooth like glass. and at the base, partially buried in moss, the glint of a silver chain. A locket. No one touched it. Time passed. 5 years to the day after Warren Hale disappeared, a weather balloon's aerial camera snapped another image over the ridge. Routine. Automated. But what it captured was anything but routine. The clearing. The same one from before. The ring of stones was back. 13. All in place. And in the center, a figure. Not clear. Not sharp. But unmistakably human. Kneeling. Waiting. They checked the balloon logs the next day. The image was gone. Erased. No backup. No metadata. It had been removed by someone or something that left no trace. Except for one thing. The physical printout. A technician had taped it to the wall as a curiosity before deleting the file. On the back, in faded pencil, was a message. No one admitted to writing it. Witnesses remain. So memory can rest. And that's when they understood. The forest never forgets. It forgives. If you give it something worth remembering. The forest bloomed early that spring. Too early. The snow melted quicker than expected, rivers swelled, and mist lingered long into the afternoons. People in Brayers Hollow said it was a blessing after a long winter. But a few noticed other things, the way birds stopped chirping at the edge of certain groves, how compasses spun briefly when pointed west of Split Rock Ridge, how dogs refused to follow their owners past a certain bend in the trail and growled at seemingly nothing. They whispered about old stories again, but only in hushed tones, mostly after dark, and only between people who remembered what had happened before. The name Lena Brooks hadn't been spoken publicly in months. But she was still present in ways no one could quite explain. A glimpse in a store mirror. The feeling of being watched near the old trailhead. The scent of firewood and wet leaves in rooms that had never been opened. She had become part of the town's fabric, both myth and memory. And then one morning, something new was found. It was a child who spotted it first, 6 years old, chasing a paper plane along the edge of the woods behind the school. His teacher called after him, but he didn't stop. When she reached him, he was staring down at something poking out of the earth beneath a low-hanging pine, the corner of a glass jar. By noon, the town was gathered at the site. Dillard had returned a week prior to help train a new deputy and now found himself once again kneeling beside something the forest had decided to reveal. This jar was different, larger, sealed tighter. Inside, folded carefully like a gift, was a full-length letter written on parchment that appeared both new and ancient all at once. He opened it. To the next one who feels the pull, the forest is awake, but it is no longer hungry. Its memory is full. For now. It does not forget, but it does sleep when kept warm by the right witness. You do not need to feed it stories. Only truth. That's what I gave it. Not sacrifice. Not fear. Just the honesty of presence. That's all it wanted. To be known. Now I know it too. I watch with it. And when it stirs again, I'll wake. LB. Dillard folded the letter with reverence, pressing his palm against the glass. Behind him, the boy who found it looked up and said, "She's still in there." The sheriff turned. "Who?" The boy pointed into the forest. "The lady in the circle. She smiled at me. She said I was brave." Dillard nodded slowly. She would say that. The jar was taken to the ranger station and placed beside the others. 3 now. All different. All left behind like breadcrumbs for those still listening. Later that week, Marla Voss returned quietly, gray in her hair now, a small scar on her wrist she refused to explain. She asked to see the jars. She held the latest letter like a sacred text, her hands trembling slightly. Then she asked a question no one else had dared ask in 5 years. What if this place isn't cursed? Dillard raised a brow. Then what is it? She looked out the window at the trees swaying under the twilight. A cathedral, she said. One made from memory instead of stone. Where those who see too much are kept, not punished, but preserved. Until someone needs them again. Dillard didn't answer, but the weight in his chest eased for the first time in years. He walked the boy home that evening. Along the way, the child asked simple questions about birds, maps, the stars. But just before he stepped onto his porch, he turned back and said, "Do you think trees dream?" The sheriff paused. "Maybe." The boy nodded. "I think they dream about people." As the door closed, Dillard stood alone on the porch, the wind brushing past his coat, carrying the scent of pine and ash and something older than both. That night, Caleb Daniels, now 12, tall and solemn beyond his years, opened a notebook he hadn't touched in over a year. He drew one last circle. Just one. A perfect ring with a figure standing in the middle. Not himself. Not Lena. Someone new. At the bottom of the page, he wrote, "It begins again when we stop believing it ended." Then he closed the notebook and placed it on the windowsill. Outside, under the stars, the trees stood quiet. But they were listening. Always listening. Let me know when you're ready for Chapter 12, final chapter. You said. 12? ChatGPT said. Certainly. Here is Chapter 12, the final chapter of Retired Doctor Disappeared in the Mountains. 5 years later, this was found in a beaver dam, written as a continuous immersive narrative, approximately 6,000 characters. Spring slid quietly into summer, and for a while, the town of Brayers Hollow allowed itself to forget. The news cycle moved on. Tourists returned in cautious trickles. The rangers reopened some low-risk trails. The jar with Lena's letter sat in a case at the ranger station tucked behind a sliding panel. No signs marked it. No one discussed it with strangers. But the locals, especially the old ones, knew. The forest had been fed. Not with fear. Not with blood. With presence. And for now that was enough. But there are always those who go looking. They come not for answers but for something harder to name. For the thrill of touching the edge of something incomprehensible. For the whisper that says you are part of something bigger. One such man was Harold Kemp, a retired teacher with a fascination for the unexplained. He arrived quietly, rented a cabin near the southern trails, and told no one about his real interest in Brayers Hollow. He had read the old forums, the erased newspaper clippings, the out-of-print journals from explorers like Harrow. He knew about Hale. He had even once corresponded with Marla Voss before she vanished again, her contact severed like a branch snapped clean. Kemp wasn't reckless. He didn't shout into the woods. He didn't whistle. He listened. He walked for days without entering the deep paths. He observed birds, tracked wind shifts, charted changes in soil. And eventually, on a still June morning, he heard something unusual, the sound of water rushing where no water should be. Curious, he followed it. He found a stream. Small but fast. It hadn't existed on any map, even the detailed geological surveys from 2 years prior. That alone excited him. Streams don't appear overnight unless something beneath the ground moves. Following the current, he came to the edge of a grove. And in the center of the grove, there was a dam. A beaver dam. But not an ordinary one. The structure was massive, too large for the stream it bridled, reinforced with materials no animal could have gathered alone. Rocks. Rotted bones. Strips of clothing weathered with age. And inside it, partially wedged between sticks and bramble, was something pale and round. He stepped closer. It was a human skull. Clean. Intact. Unburied. Harold dropped to one knee and took out his phone, hands shaking. As he turned on the flashlight, the beam caught a glint of something further back, partially submerged, a metal badge. He pulled it free and wiped it off. It was old. Faded. It bore the name W. Hale. His breath hitched. Something shifted inside the dam. A slow, dragging sound. He backed away, trembling. But just before he turned to run, something else caught his eye. A glass jar. Half filled with water, sealed with wax. Its contents floated, preserved pages. Dozens of them. He pulled it free and ran. Authorities recovered the dam later that day. Most of it collapsed in the effort, but the contents were undeniable, bones from at least 3 individuals, all human. More scraps of clothing. A compass engraved with initials matching Jonathan Harrow. And more pages. They were pieced together in the following weeks, translated, studied. The pages were not all written by the same hand. Some were Hale's. Others, Harrow's. One tentatively confirmed was Lena's. And a few appeared to predate them all. Old English, Latin, even symbols that resembled early pictographs from tribes who never lived in the Rockies. The scholars were baffled. But to the people of Brayers Hollow it made perfect sense. The forest had stored them. Not to hide. To remember. Just as Hale had once written, memory is the currency of this place. You pay it or it takes it from you. And in return it sometimes gave back. 3 days after the dam collapsed, Caleb Daniels awoke in the middle of the night. He hadn't dreamt in years. But this time he had. In the dream he stood in the clearing. The stones were gone, replaced by trees that bent in a circle, their roots pulsing faintly beneath the soil. At the center stood a figure, not frightening, not strange, just still. It was Lena. She smiled. Thank you, she said. It remembers you too. He reached out. But she was already fading. He awoke with dirt beneath his nails and a pine needle pressed into his palm. The next day, Caleb began writing. Not drawing writing. Words that felt like they weren't his, but that he had to record. They came in bursts. Symbols. Names. Fragments. They filled pages. When he brought them to Sheriff Dillard, the old man sat in silence for nearly an hour. Then said, "It's starting again, isn't it?" Caleb didn't answer. He didn't have to. The trees were restless again. The wind moved differently. Something was being remembered. Later that summer, a fire tore through part of the northern woods. No lightning. No storm. The blaze burned with unnatural speed, scorching a perfect ring across 4 acres. But when investigators arrived, the center of the ring was untouched. Green. Vibrant. Blooming. And at its heart, a small mound of stones. 13 of them. Arranged in a spiral. No one claimed to have built it. But someone had left something atop the center stone. A child's drawing. Rough. Simple. A figure standing in a circle, hand raised toward the sky. And in the corner, scrawled in red crayon, "I see you."